Welcome to the Brain Gain Youngstown Leadership Series podcast. Each week, we'll learn from leaders who are driving change and making an impact. Now here's your host, the CEO of the Youngstown Publishing Company, Jeff Hermann.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. So if you are at all interested in how careers in the military work, then this episode with James Dignan is certainly for you. I have to warn you up front, we did this on-site at Gringo's, a restaurant over on Phelps Street. So we have some ambient audio happening, but it's good. It all works out. It was a great environment, a great way to get really conversational and dig deep into careers in the military. But before we get into that, I wanted to share some Brain Gain news with you. So the Junior Achievement Virtual Career Fair was just held. I also participated. You'll find a full write-up about the career fair in our December edition, and you may have it physically in print in your hands, or you may want to just check it out on the website under the e-editions tab in the main navigation. But the JA event was a great experience. Obviously, it had to switch to virtual. Last year, 3,000 kids attended in person at the Eastwood Mall complex. This year, it went virtual. Michelle Merkel, head of Junior Achievement, was really pleased with the event. So was I. I was also a participant in the event, had the opportunity to speak to careers in sales, media, and marketing. But I tell you what, anyone that has dealt with trying to manage a virtual event, this went really well. And as with most things, the scale, the reach potentially increased, and the engagement was just different. So for the foreseeable future, obviously, a lot of events will be in this hybrid format, but it was great to see the great success that Junior Achievement had in this virtual career fair, helping kids really get an understanding of what they want to do as they pursue their career goals and aspirations. So check it out. And on to today's conversation with James. Strap in. We went about an hour. James is a great guy. I've gotten to know him over the past couple of years, consider him a friend. And I had the pleasure of speaking to him. I've had pent-up interest in how careers in the military work, especially those that change service lines. So we really got very specific and weaved us through his career. And he was generous with his time. He shared the leadership philosophies of the various branches of service. He even tells the story of how his experience working on the Israeli-Palestinian border and his time there, how that applies to situations we have here in Northeast Ohio and some of the key learnings that he's had over time. So with that, let's jump into the episode. As always, please send us any feedback that you have or any questions. And I thank you for your time and attention today. Here's James.
We're good to go. Welcome to the Brain Gain Leadership Series podcast, James. Thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Got to say up front, we're sitting here at Gringo's, a new restaurant here on Phelps Street.
It's awesome.
Pretty cool establishment. So for any of our audience out there, apologize in advance for the ambient noise. But I don't know. James and I are hanging. We've known each other for several years. Really been looking forward to this conversation.
Outstanding.
You've got a lot to offer, a great global perspective to share, doing all the important work. So we're glad you're here today.
Well, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So, we start all these interviews out with, what'd you want to do as a child? So give us like the quick sketch of who's James. And you grew up in Southern California, I believe?
Yeah, in Southern California. Back in the race to the moon and all those things. I remember as a kid laying on the grass there in Southern California and watching the jet airplanes go by. And we were very close to Miramar and El Toro Air Station. So we had the fighter jets taking off from there and going out over the Pacific. Back then they'd do sonic booms, breaking the speed of sound. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I would just dream about flying and going to the moon. And I remember being as a young kid, 3, 4, 5 years old, sitting in front of the TV watching those moonshots and listening to Walter Cronkite. And
right.
That stuff to me was just like, oh my God, how cool would that be? And I think the first time I knew what I wanted to be was on my 4th birthday. We flew.
Fourth?
My brother and
4
I.
years old?
4 years old.
Okay.
My brother and I, he was 3, I was 4. we got put on an airplane at LAX and sent to Detroit to visit my grandparents. So we went for a month. And I'm one of 9 boys. Or sorry, I have 9 brothers, one of 10 boys.
Whoa.
Yeah. So they're
New information here.
Oh, you didn't know this?
No.
Yeah, I
You have 9?
I have 9 brothers and 3 sisters.
Oh,
So-
a dozen.
Yeah, 13 counting me.
13. Wow,
So,
Baker's dozen.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
In Southern California, the average family, even in the 60s, was, like 0.5.
Yeah.
In Newport Beach, where I grew up, that was really uncommon. Other than there was one other family, the Moores, that lived right around the corner from us, and they had a total of 17.
17.
Big span. But yeah, we kept the Catholic schools, full for a couple decades.
Where are you in the birth order?
I'm the 3rd boy and the 4th overall.
Okay. So you're like
So
the
you're
upper
top tier.
Top tier, what's that, percentile?
Top 3rd, yeah.
Yeah. Top quartile?
That's right.
Is that right? Okay.
So my brother and I went out to visit my grandparents. I was very close with my grandfather. He was an executive at Ford at the time, and we flew out there, and I got on the airplane. Back then, it was a DC-10. I still have some of the stuff that they gave me, because back then, you traveled in a suit, and
Oh, yeah.
it was a big deal. And we were as kids going, it was very unusual. But we met with the flight attendant, and they sat us down. And I got my wings, I got my playing cards, and I had all of the. It was Pacific or Northwest Orient Airlines, which became Northwest, which became Delta, right? Finally in the mergers. But I remember getting up in the cockpit, flying while we're flying in the air. Let you get up there, and cockpit door was open.
Right.
And you talk to the pilots, and I said, "This is what I want to do. I want to be a pilot, and have a cool hat and with some wings, and what better life?" It was pretty glamorous, I thought,
Yeah.
and just the adrenaline rush and the fun of flying an airplane. And from then on, I always did. I didn't know whether or not it would be airlines or military or something, but
So was that always in the back of your head, like
It
I want to
was.
be a pilot, or when did you get close to that decision of, I think I want to be a pilot, and the military is my path to that end?
It's kind of a funny story. I had no background in my family in aviation or in the military or any of those, really. My father served a short period of conscripted service during Korea. Had an uncle who ended up going to Vietnam. He volunteered to avoid getting drafted, so he made his choice and went in 68, 69, which is pretty bad timing. But
Yeah.
I had a little bit of feedback from that, but it was there was no shared experience really for me. I went through school, and I thought I wanted to be a football player, and I realized as much as I like football, I don't have the talent to get me to the next level and keep playing. And I wanted to be a rock and roll star, so I played, and I worked real hard, and I did that for a while. And
Guitar, drums?
guitar.
Okay.
Yeah, and I still have a bunch of guitars, but don't get to play as much as I'd like to, but it's something I just enjoyed. And again, it was something that I met so many really super talented people, and I realized, that's probably, I can have a support role. Maybe that's probably not the future,
Right.
for me. And I ended up, because I really enjoyed it, in electronics. Built my own guitar amplifiers and things like that, and then ended up studying the theory and physics of electronics and going into the electrical engineering role. And then I ended up working for a startup company in San Francisco back in 1983, making prototype workstations for oil and gas exploration. And back then it was digitizing maps and tablets and
Right.
putting color graphics, which was unheard of. So those were the kinds of things that I was doing, working in a small firm there, working for the Shell Oils and BP and Unocal and that kind of thing, and working with their geologists and geophysicists. And my role was purely the hardware, but one of my older brothers was one of the software developers for the graphics portion, the integration. So that's how I got tied into that company. And both of my older brothers still work in the computer industry, software side.
So you're the only one that ended up in the military?
Yes, out of all my siblings.
Wow.
So I have a couple nieces and nephews that are in now. Oh, one she was in, she got out, but have a niece or nephew that's in now in the Air Force. But I did that. I worked, and then I left there and went back for a girl, of course, went back to the Portland, Oregon area and was working for Intel. And I was doing that for a while, making really good money, building custom prototype computer systems for Intel. So we were building things like the server for the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. We did a custom computer system for the Singapore Telecom, things like that.
These are in the mainframe days,
Right,
right?
right.
Yeah, mainframe computing.
Yeah, this was, the tablet or your cell phone probably has nearly as much computing power today, but these were large for data primarily, but it was coming out of the age of the punch cards and into the age of actual entry and print,
Right.
data storage, that kind of thing. But again, I was purely in the hardware side of it. We'd piece the systems together. We had a small team, about a dozen of us, all in our early 20s. And our team lead, who we called the old lady, she was, I don't know, she might have been 30. Right. She was married with kids,
Right.
and we were all like,
Really?
oh yeah, the old lady's got us on. But it was always on deadline. I was getting paid really well, but we have deadlines. They say, okay, we need this by X. Like I think of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Their system was failing and they need to replace it, so they needed it like yesterday. So the way Intel incentivized us was the earlier you get it, the bigger your bonus.
Oh.
And so I tell people, I said, I was doing this for a while and making a lot of money, but we were working all the time. So to work 60, 70 plus hours a week was not unheard of. But we're young and what the heck, it was
right.
fun, but we're working all the time. Weekends, holidays, whatever it took to get the systems out. And I got to a point where I said, okay, I can't do this forever. I don't see myself doing this forever, I guess is the best way to put it. And I said, well, what else do I want to do? I said, sports, football primarily, I always loved that. That wasn't going to be a long-term path for the career in music. As I said, that wasn't going to be, I'd still be a part of who I am, but it's not going to be a career path. I said, well, I always loved flying, so why don't I see? And I had no idea what was the process or, where to go. And
So you spent a few years in the private sector before you even joined the Navy.
I graduated high school early, and by the time I was 18, I had my 2-year degree, and by the time I was 19, I was working in industry. And I was working in San Francisco. I lived in Sausalito, worked in San Francisco, and it was fun. It was neat. Then going back to the Portland
Did you take the
area.
ferry from Sausalito to San
I did,
Francisco?
yeah. I lived my first apartment.
Get off in the Embarcadero?
Yep. All familiar, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, I lived maybe a 5-minute walk from the ferry in Sausalito, so I just walked down the hill. I tell my girls, they're like, well, how much was your apartment? Because my daughter's, one of them's thinking she wants to move to Seattle or San Francisco. I said, just beware, it's gonna cost you some money. I said, in 1983, when I moved to Sausalito, my studio apartment was $1,750. In 1983. She's like, what? She's like, well, what would it cost now? I said, it's probably like $4,000 or $5,000, yeah. And it was nothing special. It was like a 650 square foot, it was like a 4-plex or 6-plex, and I was just one.
Could you imagine quarantining in a studio apartment? Because I had one too in Chicago.
Yeah.
600 square feet.
Yeah, same.
Just, little box.
Be crazy. Well, you'd have to get outside and
Yeah.
do some things, but yeah, I love San Francisco. I love the music scene and all that. But again, it was I was working all the time.
All right, so you worked, and then you're getting to this, did you say I want to join the Navy, or did you just start, there was no Googling back then, so.
Yeah, no
How did
Googling.
you discover?
I don't really know what struck me, because this was right before Top Gun came out. And then of course everyone goes, oh, you joined because of Top Gun, right?
Yeah.
No, but that solidified my
my
choice. How cool is that? Not that I want to be like Tom Cruise, more like Val Kilmer, but
Yeah, Iceman.
yeah.
Yeah.
But being around, growing up in Southern California, being around the Navy and Marine Corps, I knew it was there. And then, of course, Neil Armstrong as a Marine, and all of my favorite astronauts were, for whatever reason, maybe not all of them, but it seemed most of them were either Navy or Marine Corps pilots. And I just always thought that was really cool. And my favorite airplanes that I liked, the F-4 was one of them, and the Navy version was just really cool. I go, how cool would it be to land on an aircraft carrier? I mean, who gets to do that? And I tell folks, it wasn't for any, larger than life purpose or reasoning of patriotism or anything else. This was about, I wanted to go fly airplanes and have fun. And
right.
What's the furthest extreme I could take that? And that was, I'll go check out the Navy. So, I went down to the Navy, I had my long hair and my Fu Manchu, and I go, hey, I'd like to join the Navy. Well, you got to have if you want to fly airplanes, you got to have a degree. I go, okay, I do. And, went on that path and did the testing. And
so this was Cold War era, just coming out. Reagan had not torn the wall down yet, so to speak, but.
Yeah, well, the Reagan build for the military had just started to come in. So I think the first time I went in was it was either late 87 or early 88. Then I officially went off to Pensacola in end of 89 was when I started. So I ended up going through the Aviation Officer Candidate School and that program, like Richard Gere and Officer and a Gentleman. I did that and then went off to pilot training and ended up in Corpus Christi, Texas, and then ended up back in the Bay Area at Moffett Field down in the San Jose area in South Bay for P3 training, and then off to Hawaii and ended up all over the world, flying P3s. And at some point there, I decided, hey, I'm not sure that staying on active duty forever is my thing. And back then it was a 6-year commitment for pilots. Now it's at least 10 that you sign up for. But as I was approaching the end of that commitment, and this was now the mid 90s and the Clinton years, it started the drawback and the military was getting smaller. So the Navy was telling pilots to go home, and I said, hey, I'll go home if you're going to let somebody, he wants to stay, I'll go.
Right.
And Navy in their infinite wisdom said, no, that's the way the Navy works. We still own you for another 15 months, and so we're going to move you next year, and we're going to own you for 2 more years after that because we moved you.
All right.
So Navy personnel policies, it's not people first. Air Force is much more people first. But long story short, I got my senator that I used to work for back in college. Mark Hatfield was the junior senator or senior senator in Oregon at the time, and he wrote a nice letter to the Navy, and the Navy let me go. And one of the caveats was I had to continue my service commitment with somebody in the Guard or Reserves. And I ended up switching to the Oregon F-15 unit, the Oregon Air National Guard, and my high school physics teacher was the squadron commander at the time.
Oh, nice.
So I called them up, I said, hey, would you take another pilot? And they were like, yeah, great. And then long story short, I never actually got to get fully trained and go through that because through the drawdowns, they were an air defense unit, they lost the bulk of their mission. And at the time, air defense is going away, right? It's the Cold War is won.
Right.
This is the peace dividend.
Wind it up.
We don't need air defense because nobody's attacking us. And so all the air defense units were getting smaller and consolidation. And at that point, I said, well, I'll look for something else. And there was a unit that within that Guard unit that they called it a combat air traffic control officer, but it was essentially a unit that would go in and advance and open up an airfield. Now they've become Special Forces combat control teams, but back then it was a combat communications squadron light with the CATCO position, and I was going to go as the CATCO, and then one thing led to another. I ended up getting mobilized and for Bosnia, and I hadn't even finished my training, and I was having fun and enjoying my time in uniform, and realized what I had missed was that camaraderie and working with the men and women in uniform and having a singular sense of purpose, and it's being part of something bigger than yourself. And that's where I more was drawn back to that. And I said, okay, but I'm going to do it. I need to be back flying. So they had a C-130 reserve unit there, and I ended up going over there to them, and it was a rescue squadron. And I don't know if you recall, but they had an airplane that had crashed out in the Pacific Ocean. They had some malfunctions on the aircraft, and they had just lost the whole crew. And they said, well, we're not hiring anyone right now, but we know somebody who is, and they referred me to a unit out in Philadelphia area. Then I got hired, and I joined the reserves, and I started flying C-130s all over the world.
Wow, so all the dots are connecting.
Yeah, it was like ding, ding, ding from one to the next. You say the best laid plan, you always got to have a plan or at least a vision of what do you want to be.
Vision, yeah.
But it's about being ready for the next opportunity, and for me, that's truly what it was. Nobody could lay out this plan like I did, and expect it to stand the test of battle.
Entering the Navy as a pilot, there's is that a different path than, say, someone who graduates from high school and enlists as an enlisted personnel,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And would you recommend to say the parents, our audience, parents who have children that perhaps want to consider the military as a career, recommend they go to school, then join the military, or recommend they join directly?
It depends. I mean, there are many different paths to getting there, say, to be a pilot. You can go enlisted, so 18 years old, right out of high school. Actually, when I was in high school, I was graduating early. I told my parents, I said, the Army had a program, high school to flight school. I could go become a warrant officer and fly helicopters. I go, how cool is that? So I told my dad, I said, I'm going to join the Army, but I'm not 18, so I need your signature. He's like, no, when you're 18, you can sign it yourself. My dad was like, no, he was adamant. The military wasn't for me. Actually, when I called him up, or he called me when I was working at Intel, and just, hey, what's going on? How's your week? And I said, hey, Dad, guess what? I'm joining the Navy. He's like, what? Why would you join the Navy? He actually said, why would you throw your life away? Oh. That was his vision of what the military was. And during his time and his perspective, in the 50s and with Korean War, he was in grad school out in Michigan. And back then it was either you come in and serve your 15 or 18 months or whatever it was of conscripted service, or we'll defer it, you finish your college and you'll come in and you'll serve 2 or 3 or 4 years, whatever it was. So he took the option of, well, I'll just go leave grad school now, go finish out my 15 months and go back home, and that's what he did. And so here's somebody who's in business school at the University of Michigan, and or actually engineering school then. He did business school later, but here in grad school, and they hire him or take him into the Army. They send him first to train as a cook, and then they ended up putting him as a motor pool driver. So he's in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, driving around, colonels and generals.
Right.
And he's like, this is a waste of my time and theirs to have me doing that. So that was kind of his perspective. And he's like, well, you're making good money, you have a great job, a great future. Why would you throw that away? And I said, Dad, that's not what I see myself doing in 20 or 30 years.
So you had the foresight, more or less, to at least envision the future, not with a degree of precision, but you just couldn't see yourself building
general
mainframes.
Vision that this wasn't it.
So look, in the 80s, I graduated in 88, and joining the military just wasn't, it was rare.
Yeah,
it wasn't talked about. It just wasn't a path typically you followed. So would you say, based upon what you know today, is it a different experience for, say, someone in high school or college to join today? I mean, is there?
Well, I think it is, and post 9/11 especially. So we have to remember a lot of these airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines that we have coming in now, they weren't even alive.
Yeah, right.
When 9/11 happened. It's like, wow, how can that be? But let alone Vietnam or that experience, these kids tend to have more, it's not just, and none of them are there because, go to jail or join the military. That they're not accepted. Right now, about 2/3 of all youth graduating high school are not eligible to join the military, meaning they don't have the moral requirements, meaning they haven't been arrested or done something illegal, or they haven't graduated high school, or they have some other disability that prevents them, and obesity being the single biggest.
Wow.
So they can't pass the fitness test just to get in. So we have to deal with that. But a lot of the kids that do come they're much higher caliber enlisted airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. During conscription, all bets were off.
Right.
You know, the Trumps of the world never were conscripted.
Right.
For whatever reason. I forget what his was, flat feet or something, right? But you go on down, you know, the higher echelons of our society didn't serve. And in conscription, it meant that, you know, those less fortunate, coming from more disadvantaged backgrounds, were the ones that were serving. And that's part of what, we'll say, during the all-volunteer force, part of the transition that happened in the military was good. We became a professional force, but it also changed who serves. So we got the best and the brightest from our lower socioeconomic backgrounds, because that was for them the easiest opportunity to get a hold of. But you'd be amazed at the kids that come in today into our military. These are great kids. It's not the dregs that, well, you know, Jimmy doesn't know what to do with his life, so, you know,
right.
Join the military, you know, join the Navy, see the world. I mean, there's still that too, but
right.
A lot of those people won't qualify today.
Now, if you have, say, your kids or your kids' friends, would you recommend, if they approached you and said, "I'd like to join the military," would you give them ask them a series of questions to really understand if they understand? Or
yeah, I think you hear it from like John Zettenbauer out at MCCTC. You know, he tells all their kids, you have to have a plan, right? Which college, technical training program, or service are you going to go into? You're going to have a trade, a skill, or an education coming out of here. Not the same path isn't the right one for everyone. I was like, what a great way to provide that opportunity, to make them aware that the military is an opportunity. Now, to your point, would I just give a blanket approval? No, but it would be, the military can be good for somebody who doesn't know what they want to do. Give you some structure, pay for college, give you some spending money. I mean, there's lots of things you could do. Maybe learn a skill, do something like fly an airplane. You know, could have done it some other ways, but it seemed like the coolest path was to join the military. And for some kids, you know, it's like, if you're not sure what you want to do, you know, be careful, but, you know, try to make based on what you might see yourself doing, you know, is the Navy more your fit, you know, can you see yourself stuck in a submarine for 4 months underwater?
right.
Well, no, I don't want to do that. Well, okay, you might be careful and make sure that you get into a career path that's not going to send you there. Or maybe that sounds really cool. I'd like to work on nuclear reactors. Well, good. Better have really good test scores. But, you know, you have the whole range of enlisted opportunities in all the services, but, you know, especially in the Air Force and the Navy. The Marines and the Army have their high-tech sectors as well, but it's a much narrower band. So for somebody who just didn't really know what they wanted to do, but said, you know, I really like being on the rugby team and, you know, that physical, okay, maybe just going in and being a Marine grunt would be good for you. Yeah. But just try to, you know, open your eyes and make sure you know what you're getting into. But I would always say, is there something that you really would like to do? And focus your recruiting efforts into that, and making sure you're working with the recruiters and you don't get the wool pulled over your eyes and you end up somewhere that you really want to. You know, I'll say cook, which is something that people go, well, like my dad, go be a cook. You know, that's, well, some kids, that might be a lifelong, you know, goal, to be a chef and work it. Well, you can go to all the services, but in the Navy and the Air Force, they have a lot of opportunities. Well, they'll send you to culinary school, and you could be serving, you know, the president on Air Force One. You could be doing all kinds of really neat stuff. And people go, oh, I never would have thought that opportunity was in the military, but they're out there.
Right.
You know, to go be somebody that's flying satellites, that's flying drones. I mean, those opportunities exist.
The Brain Gain is a collaborative effort, and we'd like to thank the headlining members of the coalition, including Sweeney Chevrolet Buick GMC, the Moransky Companies, and the Mahoning Valley Manufacturers Coalition. Also included are Farmers Bank Group, Youngstown State University, Eastern Gateway Community College, the DeBartolo Corporation, Cortland Bank, MS Consultants, and 898 Marketing.
The military and a career in the military is about leadership, right? And it's really about the chain of command.
Yes.
Now, is leadership something that's taught? Is it just simply, does it just happen because of the structure? Or I'm curious how you would coin the term leadership relative to a military career.
Similar to the recruiting and going into the services, and part of why I would ask the question, what do you really want to do, is about style and about structure and format.
Yeah.
And it does, in the end, all come down to leadership, but each one of the services has a different, for lack of a better term, a different mentality or a different mindset, both on leadership, and some of that comes down to what are they required to do in execution of their duties in the military sphere. So we know the military is not a democracy, so collaborative leadership still works and is executed in all the services, but it's different. I'll use a story to illustrate why it's different. In the Navy, I was a legal officer. I went to the Naval Justice School. I was a pilot first and foremost. That's what I did. But every day when I went in and I dressed in my uniform, I went in and I was the squadron's legal officer. So I did wills and powers of attorney. I did the court martials, Article 32s, all that stuff. I was a pilot, but
right.
I went to the Naval Legal School to learn that, and I was working with, obviously the commander and the exec and the senior staff of the unit to do the legal piece. I was working on standard of forces agreements when I was in Japan, and in the Air Force they would be looking at you crosswise. You're a pilot. Why are you here doing lawyer stuff? Well, because the origins of the Navy were, we have a ship. There are 100 beds on this ship. There are 200 jobs. Well, we're going to divvy up all the jobs to the 100 people that are here.
Right.
And that's the Navy's mindset, is you're more than just a pilot. So we had, my follow-on jobs. I was a maintenance officer. I worked in life support. I worked in admin. But those are the kinds of things that you do, so you can be in training and you become a much more rounded leader. And I always joke, the Navy produced a jack of all trades. I knew this much of a lot of stuff,
right.
but nothing really in depth other than flying an airplane. And the Navy intends, whether you're a pilot and with a shore-based unit or you're living on a ship or a submarine, every officer and every enlisted sailor has a whole list of things that they do. What's their role and mission within that boat or within that ship or on that airplane? So it tends to lead to a different leadership style and environment. And then on the airplane I was on, in the P3, there are 7 enlisted and 5 officers. And the Navy is very hierarchical. All the services are to some extent, but the Navy especially. Officers are officers and enlisted are enlisted, and the two shall not ever come together. You don't eat together. You have separate dining facilities. You have separate berthing facilities and separate, there's an officers club and an enlisted club. All the services do that. But in the Navy, there's a fine demarcation, like Mutiny on the Bounty. The officers are the officers, and the sailors are the swine. And that just goes back from hundreds of years of how you do it. You only have a handful of officers, usually a very small number of officers, and a large number of enlisted that are actually getting the work done. So the style is very different, and how you execute your mission is done differently. There's still collaborative leadership, but there's a definite, this is the boss, and here's everyone else.
What if you completely disagree with the orders you're given? That's, how do you deal with that?
Well, depends. Like in an airplane, I was going to say in our aircraft in the P3, you have 7 enlisted and 5 officers. So we had 3 pilots, 2 navigators, and then we had sensor operators, radar operators, and flight tech and armaments guys that worked in the back. So everyone has their role, but together you function as a team. And as a result, really, of commercial aviation, the military took on a lot of things that they learned in the late 70s. You remember the crash in the Iowa cornfield and the crash in the Everglades, and these things developed this concept of crew resource management. So while there's one captain, like one captain of the ship or one captain of the flight, there's a crew, and everyone provides input, and everyone has a different piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. So there's ways that you can find, of course the leader has to be willing to hear it and listen, but it's collaborative leadership of making sure you're listening and hearing what people are having to say. Now, if you have a dictator that comes in and says, I'm going to come in and do something that's either immoral, unjust, or just wrong, then every one of those soldiers, sailors, or Marines has a duty and a responsibility to speak up. Now, can only go so far, right? Because there still is insubordination, which can be mutiny or insurrection, and go on down the line. So the outcomes may be quite different than working at the Business Journal or somewhere else. You're going to get a lot more feedback,
right?
And it's required. And like I said, in the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Army, it's a little bit different of how that disagreement is accepted, in the system, and it takes a leader who's willing to listen. But in the end, they have to all understand that the captain is the captain, and that's what we're doing. Hopefully you can bring everyone on the team to agree,
right,
and to follow. And I say the general officers or the flag officers, the admirals in the Navy, when I just say paint it with a really broad brush, generically. The admirals I've met general officers of all, flag officers of all services, and worked with many of them. The general officers that come from the Navy tend to be more well-rounded, I'll just say softer on the edges than the other services. The Air Force kind of has two different groups, and we're trending towards most of them being in one, and I say either the political generals, those that are very politically savvy and very adept at working in the bureaucracy, and then you have the operational generals, those that can fight the fight. The Air Force over the last 50 years has gotten to where the political administrative segment is larger than the operational segment. So I think that's something the Air Force has to look at for its long-term health. How do you balance that? Because you need both. Mm-hmm. And the Navy, by its design, creates, trains, and educates their officers over time to be, the jack of all trades.
Right.
They're looking more for that. So people go, oh, well, why is it that every admiral that I see is a pilot? So it's not exactly true, but it's largely true. So the only captain of an aircraft carrier will be a pilot. People go, what? So you have people in surface warfare, we call them the black shoes. So those are the regular navigators and commanders of the ships. They can command every ship out there in the fleet, pretty much. Submarine guys do submarines and ships do ships, but everyone except for the carrier. The carrier captain will always be a pilot. Because understanding the broader portion of the mission of how do you execute, operationalize that piece of the puzzle. So he goes, is that fair? Maybe not, but what they do is, it forces the Navy to develop their flyers, if they're going to be the ones that are going to rise to the ranks of, the captains of the aircraft carriers and fill the vast majority of the admiral ranks. Well, they better have a good understanding of the rest of the operational Navy, whether it's intel or admin, you name it. And the Navy's, like the Air Force has gone a little bit this way, the Navy has broadened it now, so there is much more career upward mobility for those that are not pilots, which is good, but I think the organization has to monitor itself of, its health and how are its leaders managing, and what's the leader of tomorrow going to look like.
Right. Well, how much of your leadership style today was harvested through your career?
Well, I think
things you kept and things you threw away.
Well, we all learn over time from our mistakes and just from growing up and maturing, hopefully, right?
Yeah, right.
And going along, I think as a young officer in the Navy, I was very matter of fact, and it wasn't my way or the highway. It wasn't that, but my listening period was very short.
Right.
And I was very direct. I had a boss. I was a major, so I was in the Air Force, and I was just gung ho, and flying the airplane, and I wanted to be the best operator that there was, and that was what I did. And I tell guys that I was flying with it, I didn't mince words. I said things how they were, and I disregarded their feelings and their, not completely their input, but I was quick to disregard their input. So that's what we talked about. How do you disagree? I was one of those guys that you were going to get one shot and that was about it. And my boss told me, he says, James, please stop petting the cat backwards. And I remember that for a long time. And he was an enlisted airman, and he grew up in the Air Force, and then Air Force sent him to college, and then he became a pilot, and they sent him to pilot training. And I thought about that, and I said, and that was really for me as a transition where I was leading from, as we say, the pointy edge of the spear from the warfighter to now I was doing more management. And so now managing people is something quite different than leading, a small crew on an airplane. And I had to learn that I needed to take input better and be open to it, listen what's being said, and then provide feedback. And try to speed up that cycle. And as I got older, and one of the areas as I got, still a pilot in the Air Force, but one of the things that became my area of specialty was in planning. So first it was tactical planning, then operational planning, and then ultimately strategic planning. And a lot of that really fed into how I think and operate today, and how that works, in a business environment, say,
Right.
as opposed to the military environment, because not that we're a democracy in a business, but we operate much more so.
Right.
You have to, not that it's decision by committee, that drives me nuts, that's just me personally.
Right.
The State Department operates like that. It's, decision by committee and consensus building is tedious, and it's...
And European.
Yes, it's painful. There's a need for it, but
Right.
I had the opportunity to work as a planner in Israel and Jordan, in the West Bank, worked with the Palestinian Ministry of Interior, helping them with their strategic planning. And it really opened my eyes, of what the State Department mindset is, what the diplomats do, which is listen and
Right.
talk, and we try to arrive at consensus, and we go around the table.
Was it hard coming out of a career in the military to
yeah.
be a listener and to be in a consensus-driven role?
Definitely.
Did you have to bite your tongue, or was it just maturity that got you there?
I don't know that would be fair to say maturity gets you there. It's just a different style.
Yeah.
If it's a different model, and there's a need for that sometimes. But even in a business, say, you're my picket, CNC operator. I don't need you to understand why we're doing it, but I would like you to understand why we're doing it.
It just makes the overall path.
This is where we're going, right?
Yeah, right.
I need you to operate the machine in the safest, most efficient method possible.
Even in the tightest command and control situation, it's still good if everyone's on the same page and everyone has a shared sense of mission and vision. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and now the communication loop tightens the more you're in a critical environment, and whether that is in business or in combat. So that's what that tolerance for listening is going to get small. That window for opportunity is going to get smaller and smaller.
Because you got to keep going.
And that includes whether it's your coworker or a subordinate or the guy in the back of the airplane. There's a military strategist that came up with a term. It's called OODA loop. And Colonel Boyd was his name. Actually, I had his son worked for me when I was in Seattle. But he came up, he was a fighter pilot out of the academy, and just one of those big thinkers. And his OODA loop was observe, orient, decide, act. And it's a circle. He says your leadership, your combat decisiveness, and primarily his was focused on combat. How does a fighter pilot, why were American fighters losing to the Chinese and Russian pilots? Was it aircraft or was it the operator? And they found out it was a little bit of both. And the problem was Americans were so dominant that when they came back, where now the equipment was equivalent, or maybe the Russians had a little bit of an advantage at the time, the Americans were relying on the equipment to provide the advantage, and their tactics and their interoperability was failing. So the observe, orient, decide, and act. And it's about, he calls it the OODA loop. And you have to tighten that loop, and then when there's a time of peril, time of question, and then when you get back to a more relaxed time or back in peacetime, now that loop can loosen. And now as you have a crisis or an emergency or a response, now you have to tighten that loop. So it's the idea is you observe your situation, listen, take in input, see what's out there, orient. Now you have to place yourself, okay, where am I in this? I understand the big picture. We're here, we're going there. And now I have to decide, okay, that's where I'm going. So I've done the observe, orient, decide, now I'm going to act. And as soon as I act, go back to, did I achieve what I tried to do? Did we get the results we were looking for? Did I make the right decision? Could I have done differently? Did I get all inputs? Okay, and then now the process starts again. And you continue to do that. And the same works in business, and it works anywhere. And I think you and I had talked about it before. I said, when I first came to the chamber, I mentioned to the staff in my first staff meeting, I equivocated this job of bringing somebody like me into a business development, economic development entity. Well, what experience do you have that will work here, and how does that translate? I said it's very similar. Leadership and management are not the same, and this was really about leading and managing a team. So it's really, what are the objectives, and then how do we facilitate that the best? But I said, this, to me, the Mahoning Valley reminds me very much, for economic development primarily, of the decision processes that the Palestinians find themselves in. They're like, "What, you're comparing us to the Palestinians and the Palestinian territory?" I said, yes, on a very simple point, is that we in the Mahoning Valley, I'll start with the Middle East first. When I go there, the Israelis, they want to sit you down and talk to you. I go to the first meeting with the minister of the Palestinian Interior, and he said, "James, let me explain to you the history of the Palestinians and where we are today. Back in the turn of the century, and the Churchill White Paper defined what the Palestinian territory was going to be in the break of Transjordan," and they walk you through the whole history to today of where they sit, and they will explain to you that everything happens to them. So they don't make any decisions. These outside entities were, from the white paper on down to the wall and the checkpoints of today's West Bank. It happened to them. Other people made these decisions, and there was nothing they could do about it. And of course, the Israelis, they would tell you, "Well, James, let me explain to you, 2,000 years ago when the temple fell, this is what happened to us and our people." And they'd walk you up to today, why, not to justify, but just to explain, this is who we are and why we're here. And the stories were not that different. They were just arrived at differently. And here in the Mahoning Valley, I always heard people saying, "Well, you don't understand, in 1979, the whole world fell apart, and it came down." I said, as a student of history and just wanting to know and be aware, I really went in and delved into it. And I tell people, especially the longtime Valley residents, I said, that's a little bit of revisionist history, because it's not true. Did it happen? Yes, but the beginning of the end wasn't in 1979. The beginning of the end was really during World War II, about 1942, when U.S. Steel, amongst a number of other large entities, made decisions then not to invest in the industry that was here. And in post-World War II, they chose to invest in, where did they build those new steel factories and mills? Japan and Germany. They weren't investing in 1950 in the mills here. And you could say, well, maybe the real beginning of the end was when local ownership of all the industry that was here left. That would be the Youngstown Sheet and Tube. When that finally sold in 1969, you knew that the beginning of the end was truly coming. Now it was just stretched out of, how long can we let this happen to us? No one was being proactive about, how do we change that course? Because if we do nothing, this is where we're going to end up. And we found that out in the late 70s and the early 80s, and it all happened to us. So we have to change the dynamic of, how do we make a plan to change the trajectory we're on? So back to Colonel Boyd's OODA loop, have we observed what we're doing? And what we chose to do here in the Valley was mostly ready, aim, fire, or worse yet, ready, fire, 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 stop. Are we hitting what we're shooting at? What is it we're doing? And good people were doing what they thought were the right things, but we weren't looking for an outcome, a specific outcome, or we weren't achieving it, either of which should go back and say, we need to rethink our plan and how do we move forward and be proactive about it. Failing is going to happen. All of us will fail at some point.
Right.
How do you respond to it? That defines the leader. How do you change the trajectory? How do you try? Because you sit there and you say, well, that didn't work. Maybe it was my leadership style. Maybe I didn't understand the premise, or I was operating under a faulty premise. What do we do? And helping each other as a community. And here, whether it's in the Palestinian territories or in the Mahoning Valley, if we stay in our little silos, we're not going to be successful.
Right.
I can guarantee you that.
So do you think the current economic development happening today with, say, Ultium Cells, GM, LG Chem joint venture, Lordstown Motors, TJX, are these things that happen to us, or is there a plan and a vision and an outcome that do you feel like we're all together, or these were just kind of fortunate happenings that are kind of now putting us on a path?
I think, as we talked about before, you have to prepare and be ready for the next opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you look back 2 years ago, I wrote an op-ed, President Tressel wrote an op-ed, we had a few others, Ohio Manufacturers Association wrote in about why the Mahoning Valley should support a battery factory. And when we worked with people like Dave Green, when I came to the chamber and looked, you go, much like the steel factories of the 70s, what was happening was not sustainable. People go, oh, well, it was great. I got great pay and I got all these benefits. I got 5 weeks off every summer because we furloughed everyone, but you're being paid. How sustainable is that? Right. But we looked at, oh my gosh, we're down to 17,000 cars a month. That's not sustainable. Are we still going to maintain 3 shifts? And then we start talking and find out, no, not only we're going from 3 shifts to 2 shifts, but we knew that 1 shift was coming. Now we go, okay, looking a little further out, what's the next vehicle that's going to replace the crews? Because this is really important. And if there isn't anything behind it, that means there isn't a plan.
Right.
And so talking with Dave and the United Auto Workers and the others said, we can do this a number of different ways. We can be combative, we can be obstinate, we can be loud and shout at the company, or we can go, General Motors, you need to know what you have here, both in the workforce, in the factory itself, and in the ecosystem that surrounds Youngstown. And it's not just Lordstown, it's much more than that.
Right.
And the whole automotive industry and the history and the excellence in manufacturing, and we've got additive manufacturing. We can be part of your next generation vehicle. And I truly believe that by that narrative, feeding that narrative to not only Detroit, but to Washington, D.C. and to other parts of the world that say, no, the Mahoning Valley is not irrelevant. We've always been involved in manufacturing. Now we're involved in all the next generation additive manufacturing and next generation manufacturing techniques and strategies. Steel is part of who we are and it will continue to be, but it's going to look and feel different. We're going to be smarter. We're going to be better than any of our competitors, because that's our competitive advantage. And we're going to take that and say, this could be the next place for you to do things like electrification. And we started having that conversation within ourselves.
Right.
But then beyond that, and sending those messages to places like Detroit. And early on, the Detroit Free Press and the Automotive News started carrying things about, could Lordstown be the next generation auto manufacturer? Could that be where it is? Because everyone assumed that was all going to happen in Detroit,
right,
at their Hamtramck plant and a few others. They were already building batteries with LG up there. And so talking, whether it was with the lieutenant governor and governor when they were on the campaign trail, said the very first thing you need to do is talk about GM and talk to GM, because as the president of the chamber, I don't get an opportunity to sit with the president and CEO of GM, but you do. Use that and say, the state of Ohio wants to be part of your next opportunity. We told that to the Trump campaign as they were working through, as well as Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman, and say, we want to tell our own narrative here about the Valley of who we could be, what we want to be. So was it a unified decision? No. But I think we all looked and said, we have a couple paths that we can go down. Let's choose the one of being, okay, maybe it's a little aspirational, but let's choose our own path. Right. Say, we want to go this direction.
Right.
And working with the things that we already had here, like America Makes and YBI and Bright, and saying, look what we have here in Youngstown. Because people go, well, why Youngstown? I said, because we have these assets here. Not only that, we have this legacy and this history that we're proud of. But we can be part of the next generation. Don't be telling the story about what happened.
Yeah, leave that behind.
And we're proud of it.
Right.
And some of it was painful. But that's why you have that strength in manufacturing here, and let us be a part of your next generation manufacturing. So I don't think personally that in 2018 that GM had Lordstown on their map as part of their electrification plans. Mm-hmm. I think it was through the Trump administration, our governor, lieutenant governor, our other elected officials, whether it's Sean O'Brien and Mike Ruley or Tim Ryan. I mean, every one of them, and we were always pounding on them, tell the story. This is what we want to be. And just bringing that home, they started thinking, oh, well, maybe it could be. Like I said, the press in Detroit, my aunt was telling me all the time, she retired from Ford and she's always following all the automotive news. And she's like, wow, you guys are just in the press up here all the time. We're more up there.
Huh.
The union happenings, the layoffs, and then some of the things we were doing at the time, trying to encourage GM just to invest in Lordstown and keep the UAW workers we had here and keep our family intact best we could. But knowing full well that that may not come to fruition, there may not be a new product to save the plant as it currently is, but we wanted to make sure that we were ready for whatever that next opportunity might be. Nobody had any idea that a battery factory was even in the realm of possibility. I think we were thinking about some electric car or something else, but hey, why not? You know, and then people would say, well, LG's really not interested in a union stronghold like Youngstown. I said, look, we've got strong trades here, union and non-union, and they're a strength. They're not a weakness. Let us explain to you how that can work for you and your team, and start having those discussions at very high levels, just that they're even willing to consider it. And I go back to the Palestinian territories. I would tell the minister, I said, well, how many Palestinian security forces are we going to train this year? Well, I don't know. You Americans are training them. You tell me. I said, well, how many do you need? Well, I don't know. Well, how many borders are you going to have? Because basically with each border crossing you need so many, and then you have to have some internal security forces. So, how many police stations are you going to have? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, let's go step back a couple more and go, hey, what do we want to be? Well, we would like a future Palestinian state. Okay, well, what's it going to take to get there? Because the Israelis have a vote, whether you want it or not, right?
Right.
Well, they want a secure border. Okay, well, let's start talking about now how many border crossing points do we have? Well, I don't know, whatever the Israelis let us. Well, okay, how many do we currently have? And you go there and say, sometimes it's very difficult for people to build a vision of what could be because they're stuck in what was.
Right.
Or we don't have a voice. Yeah, you have a voice, and we here in the Valley have a voice. It's about what do we really want to be. And we have a lot of really great people doing great things here, but we undersell ourselves, and we let other people tell our story. And so I think the beginning, it was a terrible crisis for us in so many ways, mainly breaking up of families and people leaving our community for the Lordstown plant to come apart. But that was the first time, as a result of the Cruise production going away with no follow-on vehicle, that groups of people that may not have been speaking together and thinking together started getting together and talking about what could be, and building some hope and a little bit of a vision. Is it unified? No.
Is there an organization that could come in and make it happen, or is this literally just the people collaborating and capturing a shared vision, putting egos aside and working together?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, putting the egos aside. It has to be collaborative. So we have, in the military we had the same thing, but I call it the silos of excellence. And here in the Valley we have our silos of excellence, whether it's Trumbull County, Mahoning County, Columbiana County, or Youngstown, Warren, Niles, Hubbard, Canfield. No, we've got to start thinking, acting like a community.
Right.
Because we are one. We're 13 plus disparate communities that have a history of not working together. Not that there's animosity, well, there might be
Right.
some, but
Yeah.
it's just we have a history of not working together, so we have to figure out how can we do it, and that's about getting together, and through collaboration is the only path that we're going to get there. We have some hurdles to do. Basically, we're built with our communities to support about 1.2 million people. We're down to about 600,000.
Right.
So we have some excess infrastructure, inventory, housing, you name it. But those hurdles can be overcome. We have to come together and figure out how we're going to do that. It's a tough job for somebody like Mayor Brown or Mayor Franklin of how do you do that? And we count on them to lead from the front.
Right.
Because it starts and ends with Youngstown and Warren.
Right.
I don't care if you live in Canfield or Latonia, what happens in Youngstown is going to affect the future of your kids.
So you've been around the country, around the world. Are we truly unique relative to every other place you've been, or is this a
Other than similar to the Palestinian territories?
right?
Yeah, we're very unique. I mean, we have a unique history. We have, unique people. We have unique struggles, and it seems to be the perennial struggle here in the Valley. It doesn't have to be that way. I see plenty of opportunity, and I think we've talked about it before. I think folks that come from outside or that left and came back can see the opportunity.
Right.
Much easier than those that are in the forest.
Yes.
And they just like, oh, you don't understand. This is what happened to us. I said, yeah, but there's opportunity. And how do we get around that? Well, we have to just keep coming together. People have to do the right thing for the right reason, or at least try and do for the greater good. Put the ego aside and say, what's really in the best interest? And I talk about the Tiger Grant, and what we see happening here on Fifth Avenue. A lot of leaders in the whole community came together and said, we all support this as our number one project. Now you might say, why would a mayor from Canfield care? Well, because what happens in Youngstown matters.
Right.
And so by all those leaders coming together and getting a nice project like this, it's small in the whole scheme of things, but it's a start of how do we prepare so we have a nice Phelps Street and things downtown are better, because as Youngstown goes, so goes the rest of our community. So we have to be proactive in how we do that. I'd like to see things of how is it done well for legacy cities like us in our community. It's a little bit difficult because we have what we have, and now how do we get what we want? We're gonna have to do things differently, and that means coming together. So things that are unspeakable, like maybe a water and sewer district that covers all 13 communities in the Mahoning Valley across 2 or 3 counties. Oh, that's unheard of. That'll never happen. Well, we have to think about how can we do it. Maybe we don't do it exactly like they did in Southern California, because that's different. Their history
Right.
was different. But maybe we can do it smartly in a new collaborative way in public-public partnerships or public-private partnerships, or a mix of the two, and make sure that we don't have a fire department in Liberty Township quarter mile away from a fire department in Girard that don't have mutual aid agreements
Interoperability, right.
and interoperability. Now, that's excess infrastructure and people that we can't afford today. So we have to figure out how do we do it smartly. And I hate to use that as an example, but it's just one of many.
Right.
Snow removal. Let's just talk about salt. Salt on the roads. We have, give or take, 20 some different purchase agreements for salt here in the Valley. Each county has a purchasing department where they can purchase one time at a great,
Bulk discount.
bulk discount for every municipality within their. No, some of them have taken advantage over that over the last few years, that we've had more of that happening. More mutual aid agreements between the fire departments and police departments that are here, and those are the kinds of things that we have to do to find ourselves, get out of the habit of doing things the way we've always done them,
Right.
and do them in what's in the best interest of our community, of our citizens. And it doesn't matter if you're Girard or Liberty. It's in the best interest that we all work together, and that your house doesn't burn down, but mine does, because we live in different districts.
Right.
How do we do it smart? So what they did, with the ABC Water District, or the what do they call it, Cardinal Fire District.
Right.
That's innovative. That's thinking about, okay, given a limited number of resources, how can we best provide those needed resources to our citizens. And it's about thinking creatively, coming together collaboratively to solve the problem. And the fire chiefs out there, well, they know the answer.
Right.
We just haven't asked them.
Yeah, right.
Or
Yeah.
something like that. So how do you do it? And that's a good example. Is it perfect? No, but it's better than what we had.
So we're on question 1 of 8. We've gone an hour so far. I feel like this is a great place to at least wrap up part 1 of our conversation. I mean, this was fascinating to hear. I've had these questions penned up for a long time, so I appreciate your time here on the Brain Gain podcast. Any final challenge or anything, final words you want to share to the audience at this point?
I think we're part of an amazing community. My wife and kids and I feel fortunate to be here. We love the people here. We have some issues that we can overcome, and I think all of us can. I'm excited to be a part of it in a small way, whatever way I can, and I think we have a lot of really good people. What's happening up at YSU is a good example. What they put together at Bright and America Makes and YBI. I mean, these are things that other communities don't have, and it's a strength. Harkens back to the history of who we are as a community, and who do we want to be moving forward. And I think if we look at that of what's in the best interest, collective best interest of our community, we'll get there. We have a lot of great people doing some really great things. Just acknowledge it and continue working together. It's possible. Right. It really is. We'll get there.
Right. Well, James, want to thank you. Want to thank Gringos here for being such great hosts. It's a great restaurant. Check it out. It's on Phelps Street. Very conscientious. It smells extremely clean in here. Right. They are all wearing masks. It's a very safe environment. Yeah, I got my mask right here in my pocket. So, but no, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we go, I'd like to thank members of the Brain Gain Coalition, especially our great sponsors. Without them, none of this would be possible. So a big thank you goes to Sweeney Chevrolet Buick GMC, the Moransky Companies, and the Mahoning Valley Manufacturers Coalition. Thanks so much for their support. And also, please follow, like, and subscribe to this series on your favorite podcast player. And if you have any questions, just go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn, one of my favorite places. You can find me over there at Jeff Leo Hermann, and send me a message. I will see you next time.
I'm growing up in this life, and to the human that I need to be, I know that I am not alone. I'm brave, I got what it takes, I am a warrior.
Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell for notifications. And also make sure to connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. For all of your business news, visit businessjournaldaily.com. For all of your arts and entertainment news, go to afterhoursyoungstown.com.